Hadn't started yet and you're already asleep? Good evening. It is good to see you. I am sorry that Jimmy is ill, but you almost have to be careful these days saying I have a virus, because we know what everybody immediately thinks nowadays. So, but it's not that one, and so we're glad for that, and glad he's doing better, and he'll be back. I am not going to continue his lessons in Galatians. I'll leave that up to him. Preachers have a way of doing things a little different when they do different books. I do it different than Jimmy. Jimmy does it different than me. We do it different than Welton. So that's just the way it is. And so I don't want to interfere with what he's got going. So when Sergio called me and said he was ill this afternoon, I thought about and began to think, when you have thousands of sermons already prepared, sometimes you get muddled about what you would like to do. But I thought about the times in which we're living right now, and it seems like we're so tired of this stuff, and everything seems to be upside down, and people are distressed and discouraged, and with not just the COVID, but all of the violence and things of that nature that's going on all over the country. And so people get a little bit discouraged and saddened by that, and that sometimes gets into the heart and life of those of us who are Christians as well. And so I thought about that, and I wanted to bring a lesson that I hope will kind of encourage all of us a little bit, to get our mind refocused perhaps on the greatness of our God and what God can do and is doing and will do for us, especially in times like these. So the lesson is simply entitled "In Times of Trouble." I have a little book. It's a little children's book. I don't know how many of you read children's books. How many of you read children's books? Ha! Good. There's some tremendous lessons that us adults could learn from children's books. One of the greatest children's books I have ever bought is this one. It's called Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day. Now, this was recently made into a movie. And if you don't have the book, get the movie, because the movie's just like the book. But it's about a little guy who's probably no more than 7 or 8 years old, and he has one of those days. In other words, nothing is going right for this poor kid. He has back-to-back disappointments and tragedies like you cannot imagine. And it's one long, continuing series of problems. The little guy just can't win for losing. You take, for example, when he gets up in the morning, he said, "I went to sleep with gum in my mouth, and I woke up with gum in my hair. When I got out of bed, I tripped on my skateboard and by mistake dropped my sweater in the sink while the water was running." And then he says, "I could tell it's going to be a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day." And so after a terrible day at school, a horrible visit to the dentist, a no good stop at the shoe store, it's at this point that Alexander wants to move to Australia. But he says, at home, Alexander slumps in his chair at the supper table, and his troubles just continue. There's lima beans. And he said, "I hate lima beans." He said, "There's kissing on TV, and I hate kissing." And then the bath water's too hot. That I got soap in my eyes. My favorite marble went down the drain, and I had to wear my railroad train pajamas. I hate my railroad train pajamas. And then he goes on, when I went to bed, Nick took back the pillow that he said I could keep. And the Mickey Mouse light burned out. And I bit my tongue. And the cat wants to sleep with Anthony and not me. He says, it's been a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. And then he says that his mom says this too. Says, some days are like that, even in Australia. That's kind of the moral of the book, is that we're going to have days that aren't going to be good. That we're going to have days that nothing's going to go right. We're going to have days that's filled with one disappointment after another. But some days are like that, regardless of where you are, regardless of who you are. And so all of us experience those horrible days when troubles of every sort just seem to crash in on us without let up. And such days create tension and stress in our lives, leaving us anxious and certainly fearful. We feel defeated and certainly depressed. And so we think to ourselves, is there any way out? How do we fix this? Is there any way that we can come to grips with our problems when life itself becomes one long and continuing, terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day? Well, I believe that Psalm 46 was born, and you can turn there, was born in the context of severe trouble. We don't know exactly what it was. Many have surmised perhaps during the time of Jehoshaphat when enemies came upon them, or perhaps the time of Hezekiah when Sennacherib was coming upon the city. We don't really know, but we know that it was in a severe time of crisis. And so, and the reason why that this psalm was born out of the severe context and severe crisis is because as we read it, it becomes an encouragement for the downtrodden person. In fact, Martin Luther, who was well acquainted with hardships and difficulties, found such great comfort in reading the first verse of this particular psalm, and which is, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in times of trouble. And as a result, he wrote the hymn that we sing on occasion, A Mighty Fortress. Mighty fortress is our God, a bulwark, never ending. And so, no matter what trouble descends on God's people, there's one that can be trusted to protect and to shelter us in any situation. Now, I want us to read together Psalm 46. You follow along with me. We're going to read the whole psalm. Psalm 46. God is our refuge and strength, very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth be removed and though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea. Though its waters roar and be troubled, though the mountains shake with its swelling. There is a river whose streams shall make glad the city of God, the holy place of the tabernacle of the Most High. God is in the midst of her, she shall not be moved. God shall help her just at the break of dawn. The nations raged, the kingdoms were moved. He uttered his voice, the earth melted. The Lord of hosts is with us, the God of Jacob is our refuge. Come, behold the works of the Lord, who has made desolations in the earth. He makes wars cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow and he cuts the spear in two. He burns the chariot in the fire. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. How many of you have what you call your safe place? Anybody have what you call a safe place? I have that. I have a safe place. It's my home. When I get home and I shut the door, the world is out there. My safe place is here in the home. That's my safe place. That's where I feel secure. That's where I feel that I'm sheltered from the storms and the winds of life. It's our safe place. If you don't have one, or you may not know you have one, but you have one somewhere. Let me give you an example of what that is. Have you ever been out all day long and you're exhausted, you're tired, you just can't seem to go anymore, and you finally get home? What do you do? What do you do? Somebody tell me. What do you do? Do what? There you go. Mine's the recliner. You can ask Sue and my daughters, when I get in the recliner, if you want to tell me something, you better tell it to me fast because I'm going to sleep. But everybody has a safe place. Now, you may not call it that, but when you get home and you sit down in that place after a day, and you know what I mean by that, after a day, a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day, you go, I'm home. It's your safe place. Well, again, no matter what descends upon us as God's people, there's one who can be trusted to protect and to shelter us in any situation. He is our ultimate safe place to ride out the storms and the winds of life. Now, in this chapter of Psalm 46, I see at least 3 divine resources for us to draw upon when troubles come. 3 divine resources. There's more than that, but these are the 3 we're going to look at tonight. And the first divine resource is this: we need not fear, we have a refuge. Again, look at verse 1. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Now, notice that God is both our refuge and strength in times of trouble. Not only does God offer us protection and care in times of trouble, but he also strengthens us to endure our troubles with grace. Doesn't say he'll take those troubles away, but he's able to strengthen us to endure those troubles with grace. God is always present to help us when we find ourselves in a very tight squeeze. Now let me explain what I mean by that. I'm not a Hebrew scholar nor the son of one. I took one class in Hebrews back 40 some odd years ago, and I've even forgotten the alphabet now, so I'm not a Greek scholar by any means. But the apparatus, the Hebrew apparatus that I use, says that the word trouble in the Hebrew means to be restricted. It means to be tied up in a narrow, cramped place. In fact, we have an expression like that. You know what it is? What is it? Anybody know? Yeah, you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. Now, we've heard that, we've used that, we've been there, haven't we? I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place. Well, that's exactly the spot that the psalmist felt that he was in our text. So then the message of the psalmist to us is that in times of trouble, we have a refuge. In times when we are stuck between a rock and a hard place, we have a refuge. We have a safe place. That word refuge is an interesting word. It comes from, again, the Hebrew that means to flee to or to take shelter in. Now, we all understand that concept, don't we? I mean, when the Texas tornadoes come, where do we usually run to if we have one? We run to a tornado shelter. Or we go to a room in the middle of the house. We put something over us to cover us, and then pray like crazy that it misses us. But that we flee to that area, that place, for that refuge, to shelter us. Well, it denotes a place in which one would flee in times of danger. Now, in the Old Testament, it would be a place like a high wall or some kind of lofty tower or a fortress of some kind. But the idea is that the people of God in times of trouble may find him to be what a place of refuge would be. That is, a place of safety and comfort. And so we need not fear then what life inflicts upon us. But he's also our strength, not just our refuge, but our strength. In other words, God is the source of strength for those who are weak and defenseless. Again, we've all been in situations, I assume, where because of some kind of trouble, we just could not see how we could keep going, how we could go on. Our strength was completely gone. We've all been there. When we trust in God to be our strength, and I mean really trust in God to be our strength, and rely on him, then we can rely on his strength as though it were our very own. Somebody tell me what Philippians 4:13 says. What? I can do all things, how? Through Christ who strengthens me. Now you hear what Paul is saying? Paul is saying that Christ's strength becomes the basis of his confidence, as if his strength, Christ's strength, resided in his own arm. It didn't, but Paul said, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Now you look in the context of chapter 4, and Paul is saying, look, I know how to be abased, I know how to abound, I know how to live in poverty, I know how to live in comfort, in everything and in any way. I can do it. And the reason I can is because Christ is my strength. That's where I get my strength. My confidence and my strength is in Christ. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. In my own life, this is one of the most difficult lessons of faith. God is our refuge and strength. Is. Underline it, circle it, arrow to it. Is our strength. We have a hard time with that. We have a difficult time with that. Because when times of trouble come, usually what's the first thing we do? For me, I try to fix it. I try to fix it. Does that make sense? I do everything in the world except what I should have done, and that's pray to my God, who is my strength and who is my refuge. But I got to do it because it's a man thing. So you see, Paul said, the confidence is not in me, the strength is not in me, but I have the confidence in the strength of Christ as though it were my very own. Now, again, it's a hard lesson to learn. But God cares for his people, and his eyes and his ears are always open to their need. In Psalm 34 and verse 1, the psalmist says, the eyes of the Lord are upon the righteous, and his ears are open to their cry. Now notice that the text says that our God is an ever-present help to those who call upon him. Now, the meaning of the word present carries more than just the idea of God being near. But it also means that God has always proved himself to be such a help, and therefore we can confide in him and we can trust him. The Hebrew writer said he is faithful. Those who've learned to trust and obey God have found that to be true. So when we're pressed down, when we're squeezed down by the pressures of living, God is there to protect and to help. Now the psalmist believed that with all of his heart. And therefore, because of this, he says in verses 2 and 3, look at it in Psalm 46, if you're still there. Therefore we will not fear, even though the earth be removed, and though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea, though its waters roar and be troubled, though the mountains shake with its swelling. The psalmist is saying, in effect, that even though the world itself should be changed by some upheaval of nature, I don't have to be afraid, because God is my refuge and strength. Now, we can believe that because nothing moves or changes God, who remains the same. We got to remember that, folks. We change, world changes, God doesn't. Malachi chapter 3 and verse 6. For I am the Lord. What? I do not change. So the eternal God isn't affected by a changing world. You know, oftentimes, and this was so true some years back, people began to rant and to rave and to fret and to worry about our environment and how that the planet's doomed because women are using hairspray. I mean, basically that was it. We're destroying the ozone because we're using too many aerosols. So people got all up in arms, and it's doomed because all these changes are coming. And now, I think we need to take care of our environment. God gave it to us to use and gave it to it for our enjoyment, and we ought to take care of it. But see, those people that fret and rave and rant and all of that, they don't understand that changes do come and changes will come because this world is transient. This world is temporary, and one of these days it's going to be destroyed. In 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 10, Peter said, but the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens and the earth will pass away with a great noise, and the elements will melt with fervent heat. The earth and the works that are in it will be burned up. But in contrast, the psalmist says, to this shaky world, our God is a rock of security that cannot be moved. And so when we turn to him and trust, he's there. I want you, somebody will read, right, for me if I ask you to. This is yes and this is no. Somebody will read for me, right? Okay, I got one shaking his head. I don't know if he's nodding asleep or if he's saying yes, but I think he's saying yes. Turn to Isaiah 41 and verse 10. If we have somebody else that will read, I want you to turn to Psalm 27 and verse 1. Isaiah 41 and verse 10, and then Psalm 27 and verse 1. You have that, Roderick? Incredible. Did you hear what he said? Don't be afraid. Why? Because I'm going to help you. I'm going to uphold you with my righteous right hand. You don't have to fear anything. Now, Psalm 27 and verse 1. Somebody have that? Those two passages of Scripture from Isaiah 41 and Psalm 27 are another couple of verses that, like Psalm 46, are a balm of encouragement in times of trouble, because they tell us, just like Psalm 46, that God is our refuge and our strength. So we need not fear. We have a refuge. Now, let's go to the second point. Oh, and by the way, if I go over an hour, Sergio said it was okay. So, get on to him. Psalm 46 continues, and he gives a second divine resource. The first one is we need not fear because we have a refuge. The second one is that we need not faint because we have a river. Now, look at verse 4 of our text of Psalm. It says, there is a river whose streams shall make glad the city of God, the holy place, the tabernacle of the Most High. I appreciate what one has said about this verse. So if you don't mind, I'm going to read what he says about this, and listen carefully to what he says. He says, in contrast with the scene of tumult and disturbance in the world at large, which the writer has presented to us in verses 2 and 3, he now shows us, resting in the perfect peace and tranquility, the city of God, threatened indeed by the nations, but undismayed by them, and calmly trusting in the protection of God who is in the midst of her. In this city he assigns a river whose streams shall make glad the city of God. He goes on and he says, this is certainly imagery in which we may recognize the perennial fountain of God's grace, that pure river of the water of life, which welling forth from the throne of God and of the Lamb continually refreshes and gladdens the church of Christ. Listen, we know that physical life is a frail, delicate thing, which can be taken from us all in an instant. And it really doesn't matter what age you might be. And there's no place in the world of calamities and accidents and diseases and injuries where the physical body can really be safe and secure. But Christians are made glad in the knowledge that even though our physical life may be destroyed, they still have life indeed. Life which the bombs and the bullets cannot shatter. You see, we know that if the cities of the world melt under some nuclear holocaust, some blast, God will provide us a place of residence in his new indestructible city, where there is permanent refuge and absolute security. 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 1 says, for we know that if our earthly house, and he's talking about this tent, our earthly house, this tent, be destroyed, we have a building of God, a house not made that's a tough one for me. One of the verses that which was important to me after our motorcycle accident was this one. We know if our earthly house, this tent, be destroyed, we have a building of God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. Man, that says so much. We don't have to faint because we have a river, a place of calm, and a place of peace. Now, there's a third divine resource to draw upon in times of trouble. We need not fret because we have a revelation. Look at verse 10. I love this verse. It says, "Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth." Now, what does that mean? Well, when we search for the answer to that, let's take just a survey of the Psalmist Beliefs, which he's previously expressed, and you'll understand. Number one, he says he's confident that God is willing and available to help in times of trouble and need. Secondly, it's his solid conviction that though his life should be destroyed in some upheaval of nature or a siege upon the city, that he would still find protection and security in an eternal city whose builder and maker is God. And then finally, the psalmist voices his belief that God is in control of the activities and the affairs of this world. And though calamities may come, lives be lost, he's still able to bring blessing out of tragedy and make all things work together for good. Romans 8:28 says that too, doesn't it? It doesn't say, Paul doesn't say everything's going to be good, but he says he can make all things good. He can turn things out for our good. You know, such thoughts must have been mulling over in the mind of the psalmist when he depicts God as saying to him in a moment of calamity and crisis, "Be still and know that I'm God." Sometimes, and again, I don't know if you're like this. I'm like this. I think being the way we are, we probably all have this problem to some degree. But sometimes we all begin to think that we're in control of things. And so we make our plans without any thought to God. And yet trouble comes, and we find all of our tidy and neat little plans blow up in our faces, and our ordered and structured little worlds falling apart at the seams. Well, James says, be cautious, because when you put yourself in control, that's very easily happen. Look what he says in James 4, in verses 13 through 15. He says, "Come now, you who say," now, that's where we are sometimes. "Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city. We'll spend a year there and buy and sell and make a profit." Isn't that where we are sometimes? We make all these plans. But then he says, "Whereas you do not know what will happen tomorrow. For what is your life? It's but a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. Instead, now here's his advice, and it's solid advice. It's inspired advice. He said, instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. That's the truth of the matter, isn't it? We simply do not have what it takes to walk through the experiences of life on our own. You know what Jeremiah said, Jeremiah 10:23? He said, it's not within man who walks to direct his own steps. We can't do it on our own. But God and his word is adequate at all times. The words "be still and know that I am God" has been translated several different ways. For example, it's been translated, take your hands off and know that I'm God. It's been translated, relax and know that I'm God. It's been translated, cease your striving and know that I'm God. In other words, he's saying to us, in effect, stop trying to handle things in the power of your own strength. Cease your striving and trust me. Sometimes we have to make a real mess of things before we're willing to trust God and his word to guide us. I've made a lot of messes in my life. Have you? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. But listen, don't wait too long to take your hands off. Don't wait too long to be still. Don't wait too long to cease your striving and take the hands off the control of your life, and let your song be, have thine own way, Lord, have thine own way. Hold o'er my being, absolute sweat. Well, I'll stop. I'm really not going an hour, Sergio. I don't want you to get in any more trouble than you are. But here are 3 divine resources to draw upon in times of trouble. We need not fear because we have a refuge. We need not faint because we have a river. And we need not fret because we have a revelation. Be still and know that I'm God.